We'll start. Right, good evening everyone and welcome to the Communities of Practice webinar for race walking this evening. As with previous sessions that we ran last year, I'm moving forward into this year. These are all being recorded for education purposes and also to enable people who are maybe unable to attend the sessions to be able to view them. So I will introduce myself. I am Mark Ritchie. I'm the Technical Officials Development Manager for England Athletics. These communities of practice sessions are being run by the 4 home countries. Tonight's session has been operated or facilitated by England Athletics. Before I pass on to my very esteemed colleagues, I would kindly ask if you are able to put yourself on mute. Just to reduce background noise, and as with this session and previous sessions, this is being recorded, and if you do not wish to have your cell phone in view, completely understand if you wish to turn your camera off. So without further ado, I'm very much a gentleman, so I will pass over to possibly yourself, Ian, to kick off and introduce yourself, and then Steve, and then Noel, please.
Excellent, thank you, Mark. So I'm Ian Richards. I'm a World Athletics level race walking judge on the World Athletics International panel since 2019. I've also been quite involved in kind of, I guess, officials education in terms of the race walking pathway. I'm going to introduce now, or get him to introduce Steve Taylor. Do you want to introduce yourself, Steve?
Hi, everyone. Steve Taylor, based in the Isle, well, not based, always lived in the Isle of Man. International race walking judge on the world level since 2006. Consider himself lucky enough to be involved in Olympics and World Championships, Europeans and Commonwealth. And hopefully we'll be able to share some of the experience we've had to you guys, in the hope that you'll take your officiating a little bit further.
Excellent. And Noel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Noel Carmody. I've been an international race walking judge since 1999. I qualified. First appointment was in 2000. Currently serving only on the European panel. But again, like Steve, I've done World Championships, Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games, etc., etc.
Okay, thanks, Noel. Mark, do you want to click on the next slide for me, please?
Yes. This was working earlier. There we go.
Excellent. So I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to do today. And I say we'll try and do this informally. We're going to use, I guess, particularly, Steve and Noel are far more experienced than I am at sort of international level, but we'll share our own experiences. But also, I guess the purpose really is to go through the different roles that we have in a race walking team. I know we've got people on the webinar here and people listening to us who are maybe race walking judges, but we've also got those involved in competition management. We've got those involved as track referees who might interact with the race walking judges and the race walking team. So it's really an idea of just to, I guess, to go through the different roles, but also then to share some good practice, share our own experience of doing this at world level, but also then how we perhaps bring this back to national level, regional level in the UK. So we're going to look at the kind of roles of the chief judge. We're going to look at the chief judge's assistant. We're going to look at the chief judge's recorder. We're then going to look at some of the things that the chief judge and the chief judge recorder are responsible in terms of the posting warning board, and then the penalty zone. So we'll look at some of the rules, regulations, and operations of a race walking event. Excellent, Mark. So we're going to start with the role of the chief judge. So I guess in terms of the chief judge, we're going to look at the roles they do before the event, during the event, and what they do after the event as well. So obviously, Steve, now you've been lucky enough to be the chief judge in the World Championships, Olympic Games, etc. So we're going to obviously use your experiences here to help us in terms of the role of the chief judge. But just to give us a starting point, Steve, what do you see as being the prime purpose, the prime sort of role of the chief judge?
I think the chief judge, and one thing we should point out, the chief judge generally doesn't judge the walkers except for the last 100 meters of a race, which we'll probably touch on later. So he's the coordinator of the officials. when we had the Commonwealth Games last year, I think we had a team of almost 20 people, and you'd think that seems quite excessive, but there was the chief judge and the assistant and the recorder, and then the judges themselves. There was card collectors, there was the penalty zone manager, the penalty zone timekeeper, then there was people, we mentioned the card collectors. There was also people, when someone is disqualified, they have to be taken off the course. So there was other people involved there, and we had to have them in strategic positions so they don't get in the way of the races. One of the most important things for me, though, is the circuit itself. And what I like to do is have a look at the circuit, ideally firsthand rather than just a map. And then I can look for strategic places to place the judges for during the race. Generally, that is down to the chief judge. In some competitions, because we use the electronic method of relaying the red cards, they're in a fixed position. So, for instance, at World Championships with the Seiko systems, the judging points are set on the course, so you don't have a lot of scope there. But it's important that, for me, the judges can be placed near the turns, feeding stations, water stations, because they're key points where athletes may struggle to maintain technique, shall we say. Okay. The other thing is, how many judges do you need, or how many judges are appointed to the event? Ideally, on the road, we know that we want 8 judges plus the chief, but sometimes you only get 5 or even 6. And that's down to a number of things. One, the circuit might be only a 1 kilometer lap, a 1 kilometer loop. And also then it might be cost of the local organising team. So once you've got your team, I like to give them their positions, and I want to make sure that they have all the necessary things they need. If we ignore the electronic system of delivering the red cards, I want to make sure they've got their pens, their paper, their paddles. Armbands are nice to have, but they're not that important compared to the rest of the stuff. I do like to have a start list, because I find that's easier in identifying athletes. Sometimes you say, I know it's the guy in the red, but I can't remember his number. So you're looking for a red shirt the next time they come round. And all this sort of stuff is done in a meeting prior to the event. I like to get the judges to walk the course with me, if possible, so they can see where they're going to be, and they can look for strategic positions to position themselves. And I do allow them to move around a little. It's common nowadays during an event that the chief judge will move the judges from one position to another. And this means 2 things, really. It just gives them a bit more experience, maybe judging on a turn, judging at a feeding station, but also in a longer event. It means that any athlete who may be trying to take advantage around a turn may have picked up a red card from one judge. He's then going to he's going to have to take a chance of picking up a second red card from another judge, maybe on a bend as well. Okay.
Excellent, thanks, Steve. And I guess similar process we do for track as well. We remember the British indoors. We went and looked at the track and positions where we could judge, talk to other officials about where people could stand, because there was the high jump going on, or the pole vault going on, etc. And I think really important point you made about this is for people that are involved in competition management, for when you've got walks, is that it's really useful for the judges to have the start list. Mark, if you click onto the next slide, I think we've got an example of that kind of course map. So just, yeah, I guess, Steve, this is just an example, isn't it, of where, you know, you'd work out where people are going to stand judging positions, assign judging positions.
Yeah. So if I'm not mistaken, this is at Warwick University, yes?
Yeah.
So position number 2, if I'm not mistaken, is the top of a hill as it runs down to position number 3. That's a downhill. So that's quite an important place to judge, because it is. I don't want to say people are cheating, but people can get carried away on a downhill. Point number 5 is a sharp turn. So you'd always have people at point number 5, because the turns are where people try to accelerate into a turn or even accelerate out. So they're important positions. Position number 1, the start-finish area. People always start too fast, and quite possibly looking for a sprint finish. So they're important places to have. The chief would be up there as well, as you can see. CJ, probably not so clear as the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Chief judge is always positioned near the finish line, and near the disqualification board, which is clearly shown at the bottom of the picture there.
Excellent, thanks, Steve. And I guess that's useful that we, in advance, we can share that with other competition officials as well. That helps them, and the same on a track as well.
Yeah.
If you can click on for me, Mark. So I think, yeah, I guess here's an example, Steve, of people moving around, moving from one position to the next position, which particularly
it's a fairly new concept. What you used to get is when races were held over different days. For instance, in an Olympics, for instance, we previously had 3 events, which would be the men's and women's 20K and then the men's 50K, and you would have a different position on each occasion. At the same time, an experience I had at the Moscow World Championships, I kept everyone in the same position for all the events. And that was because we started in the stadium. We had, I think, a distance of about 700-800 meters to the circuit and then back again. And I felt it was easier once they had the experience on the first day, because some judges had to move from the circuit into the stadium or into the point between the circuit and the stadium. And I felt the experience they had, they knew what they had to do on the second day and the third day. So we left everybody the same. But I do feel it's a good thing to move where possible, because it does give people something different to look at as well. And it's a good experience. And it also keeps the athletes, no pun intended, on their toes.
Yeah, definitely. Having judged a 50K, which takes 5 hours, and that is quite important. It just freshens up your view of the event, definitely. Very similar to those of you involved in track judging, where the track referee will rotate positions around, etc. as well. So, Steve, what are the key things that we've talked about? What the chief judge does prior to the event. What about during the event? What would you see as the key areas they're in charge of? Key things to keep on top of.
Although you've got them in order there, is point number 4 is working closely with the recorder. The recorder and the chief judge, the relationship is got to be tight, and the communication is so important. So we've got the delivery of the red cards, which when I'm a chief judge, I like that they come through the recorder and they make a note of it. And then when 3 or 4 red cards come in, the recorder gets in touch with the chief to say that athlete number 1, 2, 3 needs to be sent to the penalty zone if you're using the penalty zone, or athlete 1, 2, 3 has to be disqualified. The chief judge then would check, double check if necessary, that the red cards have been filled in correctly. But the recorder would do that. If you've got your faith in the recorder, the chief judge doesn't have to do that. So it's a case of red cards have been filled in correctly. Athlete then has to be notified as soon as possible, either to go into the penalty zone or to be disqualified. We mentioned there that when you say filled in correctly, obviously the disqualification or sent to the penalty zone, they have to be from 3 different judges. It doesn't matter what the offence is, and I don't want to sound rude when I'm saying that. I'm just talking the basics. It can be for the bent knee or loss of contact. They don't have to be the same for the same offence. And then from 3 or 4 different judges, and then the athlete's directed either into the penalty zone or off the course of being disqualified. Okay. We like to make sure that the disqualification board, often known as the DQ board, is up to date, so that when an athlete walks past, they can see their number and they can see if they're picking up any red cards along the way. And if the 3rd red card or the 4th red card comes in, they're disqualified as soon as possible. It doesn't matter if that red card has or hasn't gone up on the disqualification board. And it can be by the chief judge or his assistant if he's using one. The chief judge's assistant is very helpful, particularly on a larger circuit. If you imagine if you're using a 2K lap, we have chief judge's assistants, sometimes 2 of them, and means that the athlete's disqualified as soon as possible. And that means that other athletes aren't affected if they're sort of racing alongside people. So it's good for the other athletes that disqualified athletes are taken away as soon as possible.
I think that's really important. We'll talk a bit about the finish later on, but also we want to prevent athletes who've been disqualified from finishing, because they can impact and affect the outcome of the race, and affect other athletes. So that's really important. So I guess just an example here, Steve. So I guess, you know, in a bigger competition, we have a radio, particularly between the recorder and the chief judge, and we'll talk about assistant chief judge. So just an example, I guess, of, and that's really, really important, isn't it, to be clear and concise in that radio communication.
I think the one thing I do, particularly at international level, is that I insist that when we're on duty or in meetings, so that's the pre-race, post-race meeting, or on the track, the only language that's used is English. And it might seem a little biased because that's the only language I can speak, but that's the international language of athletics. And that said, then generally with the recorder, and Noel and I have worked on this a few times, we come up with a language that is simple, but it makes the point. So you can see there, recorder to chief judge. So in this case, say Noel would be saying to the chief judge, please disqualify athlete 1, 2, 3, 4 Taylor, Great Britain. And that's all the information you need. So you've got the number, you've got the name, and you've got the country in case a number has been defaced or it's fallen off. You know the vest that you're looking for, and you might know the athlete because walking isn't a massive sport, and we do tend to know everybody. So all the information is there from the recorders to the chief judge as to what exactly is required. What we tend to do then is, and it's something Noel and I have worked on again, is that the chief judge relays back the message. Chief judge to recorder, this is what I've got. And that's to ensure that the chief judge has understood the message from the recorder. As it says at the bottom, if you're using a penalty zone manager or the chief judge's assistant, they chip in just so they know. And if and when a person is disqualified, then we also come back and it would be chief judge to recorder, athlete 1, 2, 3, 4 Taylor, Great Britain, disqualified at, and you give a time, because that goes on to the result sheets as well and to the judges' summary sheets.
Yeah, that's really. And having been assistant chief judge in the World Champs in London, working with you, Steve, that's really important, wasn't it? Because then we could work out where the athlete was on the circuit, or once we knew that someone else disqualified them, we didn't then have to look for that athlete. So I think that's really important.
Well, yeah, I mean, that doesn't mention it there. The other thing is that having done recorder at World Championships, if I've got someone to go into the penalty zone, I don't call the chief judge. I direct my message directly to the penalty zone manager. The chief judge would hear the message anyway, but I just recorder communicates just with the penalty zone for them to pull the right athlete in.
Just as an aside there, Noel, I mean, despite what we've said, having a penalty zone manager, in the recent World Team Championships and World Championships, so that was in Oman and then in Oregon, the chief judge was at the penalty zone, and the message we got was World Athletics want the chief judge there for TV purposes. So something to bear in mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
They had those body cams on, didn't they, to show like showing the paddle. I seem to remember. Yeah. But that's the other thing, isn't it? Working these big competitions, I remember being assistant chief judge. Now I basically had a camera next to me, and I had to signal if I was about to disqualify someone, so they could then pick that up on the camera. So there's other complexities when we get into bigger competitions.
Well, just as an aside, there, when we were working at London 2012, the outside broadcasting service, they would said, let me know when someone's going to be disqualified, and I would. But I also had to then give them either a point in one direction. I'd either point up the mall to say where Noel was, so they would pick him up on the camera, or I'd point down the mall to Catherine, who was the other assistant, and so they could pick them all up, because as cruel as it seems, it's TV, and we really need that sort of exposure as well, good or bad. Yep.
No, yeah, I had some experience in London. So I guess the other thing, Steve, is that, and this is now, I guess we say it's quite a fairly new rule, but not really. It's probably been around for 15 years or so now. Is the chief judge's rule?
Yeah.
So I'll read the rule book and then we'll explain how that works. So we use this in our national level championships, in British, UK, England championships, etc.
And area.
And area championships.
And area in.
Yeah, you're right. Yes, it's in our rule book. So the chief judge has the power to disqualify an athlete in the last 100 metres when their mode of progression obviously fails to comply with Rule 54.2 of the technical rules, regardless of the number of previous red cards the chief judge has received on that athlete. So, for example, an athlete could be brilliant for 19.9 kilometres or 24 and a half laps on the track, but in the last 100 metres, they give it everything to try and get a medal, a qualifying time, whatever it might be. So therefore, just to try and explain to those perhaps who are less experienced in terms of race walking judging. So really this rule there, this is a very important role for the chief judge to undertake. So I guess just to notify people, we have to let the athlete finish before notifying them of the red paddle. So though you might be in the last 30, 40 meters, you have to let them finish and then notify them of that disqualification. That's so they can technically appeal that disqualification. So Steve, I don't know if you've got any, Mark, you want to change to the next slide? There's an example here, okay. Yeah. Which I know because I was actually judging in this race. But I know, Steve, just give us your experience of that chief judge's rule and how you interpret it and how you've actually then applied it.
I've never had to use that rule to disqualify someone in the last 100 meters outright. I've never had to do that. We can see at this particular picture, one would say on the face of it alone, he looks to be clearly breaking the rules. But the last 100 meters is quite a long ride. So if you were at the start of the home straight, you wouldn't see this. So you have to position yourself quite carefully because the chances are it's going to be in the last 20 meters when something happens. So what I try to do is get towards the finish line rather than staying what would be down at the start of the home straight at the beginning of the 100 meters. What I also like to do is I like to bring other judges into the home straight to support me. So for instance, in a home straight on the track, I would bring 2 other judges into the home straight so that there was other people there supporting my decisions. I would already have someone on the home straight as a matter of course. So I would bring people in. So there'd be in effect 3 people almost on the home straight so that their actions, if they were to write red cards, would support the chief judge if he was to employ his special powers. Yeah, yes, I don't think it's been used that often. I don't think that many people have been disqualified in the last 100 meters, even though we have actually in recent times seen, here's a picture that we're looking at, we have seen examples where perhaps the chief judge's powers should have been employed.
Well, I think in this case it was because it's Dolores, wasn't it, that took him out?
I was actually judging in this event. Yeah, it was the European under-18 champs in 2016 in Tbilisi, Georgia. So yeah, the Polish guy had quite a big lead going into the last lap. For me, the Belarusian have been. I was judging just, I guess, on the first bend. I think I might have shown him a yellow paddle with 2 laps to go, but he'd been very good. I don't think he'd got any other red cards. But then was 20 meters behind coming into the straight and won by 5 or 10 meters. You can see the look in the second picture there on the Polish guy's almost appealing there, isn't he? A little bit like you would in football. So yeah, and then the chief judge was a Spanish colleague who disqualified him. So yeah, there's not that many examples of it taking place, but I think it's an important point you made, Steve. It's there as a deterrent to the athletes, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
Just not to throw something away, and also I guess this doesn't look great for the event on TV, etc.
I think there's a big talking point was the European Youth Olympics in Slovakia last year, in the girls' race, where the French athlete managed to win the race in the last 10-15 meters. And having seen a video only, it did raise concerns with the technique she was used. But I believe there were some other issues, because if you go back 2 slides, it was under events held under competitions under 1A, B, C, D, and F. But what Ian and Noel have just said to you guys is that in the UK, we use it for almost every event, because that's we feel it's better that way, and say that we don't want people just spoiling the event by running, for want of a better term, running the last 100 meters to gain either a victory or a personal best or qualifying times for any particular international standard event.
Definitely, yeah.
I mean, the one you're speaking of, Steve, is Slovakia. I was there. I actually moved to the home straight as directed. I was on the finish line. She ran across the line. Problem was I couldn't issue a red card because I'd already given her one earlier on in the race. And she literally ran across. But later, after all the debate, it was established that the last 100-meter rule didn't apply to the Youth Olympics.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's very important. So I go back to a few years, and you'll remember this because I think it's one of your athletes, even at the English schools, where someone did that. They literally ran across the line, almost jumped across the line to get a bronze medal. We didn't have the last 100 meters rule. I was judging in the last 20 meters, but I'd already written a red card on that athlete. And I remember quite respected, the track referee came and said to me, Ian, is there anything we can do about it? Who happens to be a race walking judge as well. And I said, well, not really, no. And I guess we had a debate whether he could disqualify them for unsport behaviour, but we thought it was a conduct. This is exactly why we have this rule in place.
Yeah.
Just clarify, it wasn't my athlete that did my athlete that was robbed of the medal.
It was your athlete that didn't get a bronze medal. That's what I should have said. So, but it's a good example, I think, and it really put it home for me as to why we should have that rule, particularly at national championships. So I guess, Steve, that the chief judge's role doesn't stop when the last athlete's across the line. There's important work to do after the event.
Yeah. Well, I think as soon as the race finishes, once every athlete is finished, what the chief judge has to do is to talk to the referee and actually the timing, trying to think of the name.
I guess photo
finish is just to notify anyone of any disqualifications, because that affects the rules. So again, it's talking with the recorder, have any late red cards come in, just to be on the safe side. When we did the Commonwealth Games, Noel and I were talking throughout the event, and I was at the finish line, and a quick message through via radio to Noel just to check any late red cards, yes or no. No, everything's fine. So I then got onto the referee and the photo finish team to say, result stands, no more disqualifications. And that's an important thing then, because then the system goes on with the results getting issued. And if you think of something like the Commonwealth Games, European Championships, etc., all that's live, really. The data is out and the results are finished immediately. The post-race meeting is where we get all the judges together with the recorder, and not all your team. It doesn't have to have the card collectors and the penalty zone team there. Just the judges themselves. And hopefully we would have the summary sheets available, and we would just have a check and say, is everything correct? And let's talk about consistency as well. Sort of what do we think was good, bad, or indifferent? Because the experiences we've had as judge or chief judge or recorder, we share them, and I take them away and I put them into my post-event report. And they're also learning points for myself and hopefully for everyone else to say, what could we have done better or differently for next time? The post-event reports, I do a little report for myself. Some governing bodies want to report. Certainly World Athletics used to want them. European Athletics, you always have to do a report. And I think it's also good then just to share your experiences or certainly your thoughts and figures with the rest of the judges, whether you think there was 10 red cards on one athlete, 10 red cards. There was 10 disqualifications. There was 4 athletes went into the pit lane but managed to finish. There was a number of athletes on 2 red cards, number of athletes on 1 red card, and also where there was no red cards, no yellow cards, because that showed a good level of consistency in the judging, because the athlete was obviously a very good walker as well. And I think it's really important to share that sort of information with each other and so get people to come back to you and say, what was their experiences of their position in the circuit? And particularly if they say someone was quite high in the number of red cards compared to everyone else, but that might be because if they were on the track, they were on the feeding station. And if they were on the road, it could be feeding stations, could be turns as well, just to get an idea of how they feel they did as well. And maybe if necessary, talk to them after the event away from everyone else, because some people don't want to raise their hand and talk in a group. So give them the opportunity to talk to you after the event on their own if necessary.
Yeah, and I definitely, my own learning experience at national, but then when I first started doing international events, that those post-race meetings and having a chat afterwards and messaging people after, I know often me and you will speak as well about our own experiences.
Yes.
Sometimes between me, you and Noel will share our experiences as well. I think it's really, really, really important. The only way to learn really is to do that and share those experiences. Right, thanks, Steve. Okay, right. I think we've already talked about the chief judge assistant a little bit, haven't we, already, in terms of that role? But I guess they are an important. We said they are an important function. They help the chief judge, and I guess the other role they have particularly is, we said, on a road where we can disqualify people in more than one position. but also I guess particularly when the chief judge moves to that last 100 meters, and we do this domestically in our national championships, it takes some pressure off the chief judge. They're not trying to check red cards, disqualify athletes. They can focus on that role that they have with the special powers. So I think that's where we've certainly developed this role in UK national championships, so that it's got that extra pair of eyes, hands to do that job. Yeah. Okay, and I think it's quite. I think we've talked about this. It's quite a good learning experience now for judges at national level to come along to a major to British Championships or England Championships as a bit of a learning role as well in terms of being the assistant chief judge. So I don't know, Noel, if you've got anything else you want to share around that role, or?
No, I don't think so. I think Steve's covered it quite succinctly previously. It's as you say, yeah, it's ideal for lower qualified judges in the UK to fulfill that position and to get the experience.
Yeah, definitely. Because that helps you when you become the chief judge for the first time, because you've got some experience of working with the chief judge's team. You've also got some experience of disqualifying athletes, etc. So I think it's a really useful kind of learning experience for me. I was the assistant chief judge when I was on the European panel in London 2017, but I found that really useful when I went to world level to other competitions, because I'd been in the meetings, I'd shadowed people, etc. So I think, yeah, a really useful experience. Okay, which moves us onto the chief judge's recorder. I think, Steve, you've already said how important this role is and how important that the recorder and the chief judge working together as a team, as a pair, is really important. And Noel, you're very experienced at being the chief judge's recorder, etc. So I don't know if you want to share your experiences. You know, what is it that makes a good chief judge's recorder? What are some of your own experiences?
That's very difficult to summarize, because obviously at world level everything is now computerized, and it's got, since I last did it in Doha, where it was a printout and I still had red cards to collate, now it's all computerized, it's all on laptop, it's all electronic, and it's much simpler. But if we go back to what we're doing in the UK, we still appoint a race walking judge as the chief judge's recorder. And the reason I appoint judges is so that you're taking some of the pressure off the chief judge, because as a judge, you should be able to check you've got 3 red cards, that they've been correctly completed. And if they haven't, you send them back to get them completed. Judges do miss off the infringement regularly, the time. And it's just, the chief judge's recorder is a very, very important role, particularly in our national championships, in terms of the speed in which we collate the red cards and notify the chief judge, etc. Now, from my own personal experience, I know on the very first slide it says the chief judge prepares the race walking judge's summary sheet. Very few of us actually use the race walking judge's summary sheet as our tally when we're doing chief judge's recorder. I use the warning postings stroke DQ board. If it's kept up to date, you can see how many red cards someone's got, and I just keep the red cards in my hand in numeric order. And if I've got a stapler with me, I will staple them all together for each athlete. And then when they get 3, you can just pull it straight out. If I'm just, as an experienced international judge, I'm sure if Steve's my chief or you're my chief, I'll just tell you I've got 3 red cards and you'll be satisfied with that. But if you've got someone who's not a judge, race walking judge, doing recorder for you, which does happen if we're short of judges, then as chief judge, I would want to see the cards before acting.
Yeah.
And then the thing I do afterwards, the recorder completes the race walking judge's summary sheet afterwards and sends it to the chief judge.
Can't it? If you've world championships, you've got to I know it was produced electronically, but you've got to check that. You could have up to 100 athletes on in a race, for example.
I did in Doha, and I had bits of paper coming out of me like confetti on the 20K all of a sudden.
Well, what I've seen some recorders do, certainly when we were in Oman last year, it was still the paper-based system. A lot of them, they'll use a long bit of string.
Yeah,
just with paper clips or with clothes pegs. As the cards come in on a particular athlete, you put them in numerical order, bearing in mind the World Team Championships is probably the most populated of events that we get, and the cards are just put on a piece of string in front of the recorder, so that when they get, oh, I've got 3, then a message can be sent, recorder to chief judge, recorder to assistant, please do this, that, and the other.
Yeah,
What,
I took 2 bags of very small bulldog clips, just that purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen this in China, where there's 200 athletes in a race. They've got big long boards with all these things on. But I think that's a really useful thing to do if you're using the sort of red card system. Particularly, if we said if it's raining, it's wet, etc., you can still keep them together. Then I guess the recorder also then is kind of technically in charge of the warning posting board or the DQ board. Now, domestically, they might have to do that, or they might have someone there to help them to oversee that. In a very big competition, we might have a warning posting board manager, etc., who's going to work with the recorder. So, any insight on that, Noel, in terms of like how important that role is?
Okay, yes, it's if we're talking about a manual board in the UK and we're using someone to put the numbers and what, yes, it's an important role. They've got to do it quickly. They've got to listen to what they're being asked to put up. And the biggest no is don't stand in front of the board when you're putting up the numbers and red discs, so that you're not obstructing the view of the athletes that are bound to be coming past.
Excellent. Right, Mark, I think we've got some examples of some boards. Yeah, so those of you who don't know what we're talking about, here's some examples of boards. On the left-hand side are the ones that the sort of manual boards we might have in the UK, where we've got magnetic symbols and magnetic numbers, etc. Or if we move to that's from the World Under-20 Championships, we've got an electronic version of a board there, and they might be bigger in terms of on and road events, etc. But I guess it's really important the athletes can see their numbers and see clearly the symbols that are up there. That's really important. So that job's really important. I guess whether you've got a computer to do that, you still need to check that the displays are correct, etc.
Yeah.
So some checking beforehand, working with the system, whether that's a partner that's doing that. But yeah, we've got examples of more generally what we use in the UK. We can see on the left hand side there.
Oh no, sorry. And the other great roles, particularly when we're using electronic boards. I remember in Lithuania, Steve, you were chief, I was recorder. We had a judge put a red card in for the wrong athlete. We had to get it removed from the DQ board, which was electronic. Yeah.
I mean, this is where we're going back, is that as part of the pre-judges meeting, what I'd be saying to the judges is make sure your paperwork is filled in clearly and accurately, because mistakes can be very difficult to undo if you then put a red card in on the wrong person, because it could mean someone gets disqualified when they shouldn't be. So it's clear. Just as simple things, I tell people how to write a particular 7. I prefer to use what we would call a French 7, so that it is clear that it's a 7. It can't be mistaken for a 1 or any other number. The same with number 4s and things like that. It's really, really important that your paperwork is clear. Whilst we've mentioned the electronic system, it's that you're having tablets or things as mobile phones and you're tapping the numbers. It's very easy to tap the wrong number. I was in he's a good example of them here. I was in Dudince at the weekend, and when I looked at the summary sheet, I've got a direct red card on an athlete, and I know I never seen anyone that I thought should have got a direct red card, but obviously I've hit the buttons and I've made a mistake. And similarly with these systems that they're small, just like a mobile phone. Before the event in Slovakia, I think it was the afternoon events, I picked up my tablet and I pressed the button and I'd switched it off. Panic set in. All of a sudden, the device has got off. I wasn't sure what to do, so I pressed several buttons. Luckily, it came back on. So it adds to a new potential problems. So that we just have to be careful with. Again, we don't particularly want to be holding these things as we would a mobile phone. We want something that we just slip our hand inside and it's held and it's easier. But this is a great system, because it means that you're not sat there typing out a summary sheet at the end of the day. All the data can go in simply, speedily, and they're all available within minutes of the event finishing.
I think also it's really useful as chief judge because you can see what the other judges are doing as well, can't you?
Yes.
During the race,
Yeah.
so you can see who's giving them even a yellow paddle, and then if that athlete's on the last lap on 2 red cards, you can kind of monitor what's happening a bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, last lap, first lap, I mean, one of the instructions I give to judges is that I don't want to see any yellow paddles and certainly not red cards on the first lap. There's absolutely no need for that because we should be giving the athletes an opportunity to get into the race, and we'll watch them and then use the yellow paddle to assist them in improving, correcting any errors and getting to the finish. That's me as a chief judge. I say, I don't want to see yellow paddles at the start. With this sort of system, you can see that happening. And I want to encourage the judges to be fairer because early yellows, reds, we may think that leads to prejudgment. You know, I know they're going to run at the start. I know what they're like. We don't want any of that. We want to be fair. So I always say that, you know, put away any ideas of what you've seen before. It doesn't matter what athlete 1, 2, 3 Taylor from Great Britain did last week or last month or the last Olympics. It doesn't matter. Everybody starts with a clean slate.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about some of the challenges of this, but they do outweigh it. We can get those red cards quickly up onto the board, etc. Things like the indoors, 3,000 meters, it's manic trying to get people running around tracks with cards, etc. So that is something that we now have in the UK, and we'll hopefully this summer at one of the England championships we will be able to use this system. So it's something we've invested in, isn't it? In terms of, so we just got to. We've got a bit knocked sideways by COVID, etc. But we do have that system, so we do hope that will be up and running, and then we can do a bit of another webinar, use that, and some thing is the penalty zone. Okay, so some of you, those of you who are race walking judges, those of you who've been to, and again, it's something we use at national level in the UK, and it's now been brought in at all major championships. So initially, when it started, it was really aimed at kind of I think under 18 competitions, etc. Was brought in first in things like the World and European under 18 championships. But now I think since I'm going to say 2019, I think was the first time it was used in the World Athletics Championships around 2018, 2019. It's been adopted pretty much as standard across competition. So originally it was known as a pit lane rule. Now it's rule 54.7.3, where when an athlete receives a third red card, they serve a time penalty in a. And if you haven't seen it before, you might have seen triathlon where they have similar type of systems. Johnny Brownlee very famously went in London 2012 Olympics into a penalty zone for a set amount of time. So Mark, if you can show me the next slide. We'll talk about how we set it up, and we'll give you some examples. So on the track, roughly, it's between 70 and 80 meters, lanes 5 to 7. Again, it's probably important we set this up next to or adjacent to the warning posting boards, so athletes can see that, but also those operating that can see the board work with the recorder, etc. It's 10 meters in length. Okay. The width can vary, so but I guess we might have up to potentially, if it's a big race, up to 5 athletes in there at the same time. We tend to use small barriers. We might use hurdles or cones. We've got some examples that we'll show you shortly, etc., which clearly identify the penalty zone. Sorry, the penalty lane, penalty box. The athlete, once they enter, that's when the time penalty starts. Okay, they can move around within the penalty zone. Okay, so they can do some stretching if they want. They can run in the penalty zone. They can jog, etc. They can move around. They can sit down. They can lie down, etc. But that's etc. There's no benches or seats for them, etc. Again, initially there was no access to refreshments or drinking or sponging, but we have brought that in competitions where there's in hot climates. There has been cases where that rule's been kind of changed, so you can bring in drinks, etc.
I should point out that it is water only, if I'm not mistaken, and that's because it's water supplied by the LOC, so that there's no confusion. Should, God forbid, anything happen where doping control become involved, they can't say, oh well, somebody handed me a drink in the penalty zone. No, it's just water supplied by the LOC, and that's the way of doing it.
Yeah, so what can't happen is a coach can't come from the drinks table with the athlete's specific, whether that's electrolyte or electrolyte drink or energy type drinks, etc. Because it is a penalty going in there. It's not an extended recovery period. It's quite important. And I guess similarly, we just set those up similarly in road events. So Mark, I think we've got some So we'll talk about the time penalties first, then we'll talk about the examples. So roughly speaking, it's 0.5, it's 30 seconds up to anything up to 5 kilometers, 5,000 meters. Then roughly as a rule of thumb, and then it's a minute per 10 kilometers. Now that we have a 35 kilometers in major championships, they brought in a new rule recently where it's 3.5, so 3 minutes 30 seconds. And then if we have still events at 40 kilometers and 50 kilometers, it's 4 minutes and 5 minutes. So that's as we move up in the distances, that's a substantial penalty. That probably takes someone out of winning a medal out of a top 10 position, certainly in 20 kilometers and 35 kilometers with the length of the time penalty. So again, just an example of a setup on a course there, or it's on a track with the lanes. We've got some pictures to show you which might explain better, etc. We've got the entry to the penalty zone, we've got the exit to the penalty zone, and that as we say, the time starts when the athlete crosses the line. We might, so I think we've started doing in the UK because we've seen this in other countries where we might give them a 10 or a 5-second countdown, etc. for the athlete to go out. So we would have there some assistants and penalty zone managers. What we've tended to do in things like the British champs, England champs, is we've assigned a couple of timekeepers to do the timekeeping for us, etc. From the timekeepers team. So that's become a common duty now for timekeepers at our national championships. So just how some examples of setting this up on the track. Okay, with small cones, etc. That chair there, I think, was for the people working in the zone as opposed to the athletes. Got some other examples there where the board is, etc. Might have a next example. See some examples there using hurdles. I've got some of our own examples here from Bedford, for example. I guess where we first set up. So using a combination of cones and hurdles. I think it's probably worth just sharing, isn't it, about the people that are working on the penalty zone, certainly Noel and Steve, is about how we communicate to the athletes to move into that penalty zone. So I think one thing we learned, I think, quite early on was, because it's actually have the person with the paddles, with the time zone on, actually showing them, actually guiding them in from, not just standing by the entrance, but actually moving back onto the bend almost to guide them in. So Noel, certainly this is something we picked up, I think, one of the first couple of times we did it.
Yes, absolutely. We had officials actually standing in the entrance of the penalty zone and just calling the athletes in. Clearly a disadvantage. So if I'm chief judge, I prefer if I've got someone specifically identified to guide them into the penalty zone, I like them to get up towards the bend where they're coming off, so that they're given as much notification as possible, so that they can change their direction of travel and aim straight for the penalty zone. And race walk straight in there without any obstruction. And obviously, I know very rarely in this country that we get a big pack of athletes, but the further away you are from the penalty zone, if you have got a large group of athletes, you're able to identify the one, and he or she can then maneuver their way out of the pack and towards the penalty zone without obstructing any of the other athletes.
Yeah, and I think the same principle on the road. I've certainly seen that before. There's an example on the road there, but I guess if the penalty zone manager's only at the entrance, it's easy to miss someone in a group, and they've done another lap, etc. So I've seen that happen, and I was in Doha watching the penalty zone. That happened where somebody was missed because it wasn't clearly communicated to them they're in a pack. Yeah. So I think that's really important.
And I think, I haven't seen it in the UK, but I did see it when I was watching European Championships. I think we're in Berlin. The person on the penalty zone was pulling the athletes in from when they were traveling in the opposite direction. Therefore, they were pulling them across the other athletes going that way. And I would say my advice would be always, particularly on the road, you pull them into the penalty zone and the side of the road that the penalty zone's on and the direction that they're going, and don't pull them across from the far side, which are disadvantaging the athlete even more, but you've got the potential of collision, etc., with officials and other athletes.
Totally agree with you, Noel. And I was very surprised to see that happening in Berlin. And I asked them why they were doing it, and they were saying, we just wanted to get them in. But it meant they were traveling a little bit further because across the road. And sometimes there isn't an ability to cross the road so simply. What I'd like to see is maybe just an A4 size piece of paper or card with the athlete's number written on it, so they can see You know, if I hold it up like that, sort of with a number on it. So number 1, 2, 3, doesn't have to say Taylor Great Britain again, but just so that the athlete sees their number and then we can direct them in with the penalty time. I think one of the problems we had certainly when we started out is that athletes or sports people in general don't know the rules of the game that they're in. So we're saying, you know, you have to cross the line before the penalty starts, that sort of thing. They were just meandering around once they've been told. We have to say, no, get across the line, then the time starts. And nowadays, I think they're getting a little bit better at it. So, but I think notifying, making it as easy as possible, show them the number, and so they can see it to them, particularly in internationals where we might not know who is who. And sometimes whether the names are very similar, and the communication problem if we don't speak any foreign languages.
I think I've seen and it might have been in the World Champs in Dar, where they actually had another board and it had the athlete's number and an arrow going into the penalty zone almost. You know, that's perhaps another thing to do.
I mean, I think at international level, that's probably the next level, isn't it? That the actual instruction to go into the penalty zone will be electronic, and there'll be others display boards ahead of the penalty zone with the athlete's number on.
Yeah.
I think it's about a number of officials. If you can have a spotter further down and say, here comes number 1, 2, 3, and point him out, you know, he's got a red vest on, and then when the penalty zone manager sees him, they can say, all right, I've got him, I know where he is. And it's getting the number of officials, the number of helpers increase, and but everybody has a job. Nobody wants to have a job and standing around doing nothing. So it's important that delegation is important, but also that they actually have something to do and they feel it's meaningful. Otherwise, they'll be a bit put off and won't want to come back and do anything, you say.
Right. Next slide, Mark. So I guess just one important thing, one important extra rule, and this is obviously something to, I guess, those of you who become referees or track referees. So two things, I guess. If the athlete, if the that third red card comes in the very last part of the race, and even with electronic board, the athlete's gone past the penalty zone, then that time is added to the overall result. So again, that's really important. That's communicated to photo finish, so they and have a chat to photo finish colleagues and officials before the event, that they can do that easily, alter the time, etc. I remember that the first time we did one at Bedford, everyone was very worried how we were going to do this, but I think actually those of you working photo finish can manually overwrite that. So that's really important, just to have that discussion with photo finish before an event about how this is going to be done in terms of altering the result at the end of the race, etc. An interesting question. Anyone who's a competition director, etc., meeting manager on a jury of appeal is that no one's come up with an answer to this. If we alter the time and the athletes get the same time, what's the result? So, you know, if I did 54 minutes. And then, but I had a minute's penalty. So, and we both came out with 55 minutes. What's the result in terms of me and Steve? I think that's the track referees that job. Not. But I guess it's an interesting question. It may happen one day. Very unlikely on the track because of the hundredths of a second, etc. Anyway, so if anyone's got an answer to that, let me know. Right, I think there's one final slide, isn't there, Mark? So. And the other rule, and this has been a slight rule change, is if the athlete receives, it's about that, about the time being added on, but also if they fail to enter the penalty box or the pit lane or the penalty zone, or they don't remain there for the time, then they're disqualified. But this has been a rule change. That disqualification is now by the track referee or the referee in a road race, as opposed to the chief race walking judge. So just important to know anyone who's going to be a track referee there. And I guess, regardless of that, the athlete comes out. We said the reason we have this so close to the finish, it's not always, we can't always do it at 70 meters on the road, is that we can bring the athletes in there and get that last penalty in rather than add in the time. Because actually there's probably an advantage to add in the time, because by the time you've got in the penalty zone for a minute, say it was 10K, it's probably more than a minute by the time you've stopped and got going again, as opposed to adding a minute. And again, that athlete can come out, and if it's the last 100 meters, they're straight into the chief judge, being judged by the chief judge in the last 100 meters as well. So I think we've certainly seen how that has helped. We've seen that domestic, internationally, help more athletes complete races, etc. And I guess initially it was really helping youngsters. If you came along in the first event you ever did, you got disqualified, you're probably not going to necessarily come back to that event. So hopefully, I know we've we've gone over a lot of ground there, but hopefully we've just given you an insight into some of the roles that we have and responsibilities within a race walking team, but also hopefully just shared some good practice, our own insights, and think about how we can bring some of these things that we see internationally back into our domestic competitions. So Mark, I don't know if we've got time for a couple of quick questions.
Yes, I think we do. So thank you very much to all three of you. Ladies and gents, no question is ever silly. I've prepped the three gentlemen for a lot of questions. So please, if you wish to unmute yourself and or put your hand up in terms of asking a question, I'm sure one of the gentlemen will be more than happy to answer. Now, this happened on Monday night, that everybody was quiet, and then suddenly one by one we got.
Well, Jane's ready to ask a question.
Jane's got a hand up there.
Jane's got a hand up.
It's a question for me that hopefully Steve will be able to answer. I was the judge's secretary at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham this summer, and because I've got a qualification race walking, was judging myself and didn't feel that my international judge was really giving the number of warnings or red cards that he should have done. And I spoke to you afterwards, and I think you spoke to him. Is there anything else I could have done? Did I do the right thing on that day?
I think.
Sorry, Steve, to put you in.
No, not at all. With the Commonwealth Games, you did speak to me, and that was after the ladies' race, I think.
Yes.
I did feel when I looked at the summary sheet that I'm a judge myself, and although I'm not judging, so to speak, I did look at it. I was expecting a little bit more action from the judges, and I'm a big believer in the use of the yellow paddle. I'm a big believer because what I don't like to see on a summary sheet is 2 yellow paddles and 2 red cards, because I don't think you're helping the athletes at all. When I got the judges together afterwards, I did say that I felt that there should have been a lot more yellow paddle action. Maybe 1 or 2 more red cards could have gone in. We did see a complete different take on the men's event, although part of that is because generally the ladies are better walkers than the men anyway, generally, but not always the case. And I said, I do need to see you acting a bit more stronger. Now, some of these guys on the Commonwealth Games, I don't think I'm being out of order, but it was probably one of their first times at a big international event. Possibly nerves played into it, and just a lack of experience. So yes, I think you did the right thing by highlighting it to me, but it was something I would have been ready to pick up on. I mean, when the Commonwealth Games was announced and it was coming to Birmingham, and I think a year before, Chris Cohen, who was the senior technical official, approached me and said, what judges have we got in the Commonwealth Games? And we said, well, you've got 3 in Britain straight away on the international panel in Ian, Noel and myself. But then Ian was already tied up with an event in a World Championship event in Colombia. So we were down to 2. So we could have maybe looked for different judges, but one of the things was all the judges had to come from the Commonwealth, and some of those Commonwealth countries like Canada, Great Britain, Australia have a lot of experience in race walking with the judges, but some of the others don't have as much experience, and that was reflected in the judging panel, unfortunately. But that conversation I was able to have after you highlighting it to me was invaluable, both to me as a chief judge, to them as judges, and I think to the athletes, because the winner of the men's race, when he saw the summary sheet, said he was really impressed with the number of yellow paddles that were being shown and the number of red cards, because he felt that the judges were doing their job. So great work there, Jane, to be honest, with great work.
Thank you.
Very much, Jane. Any other questions, ladies and gents?
Mark, can you hear me?
I can, loud and clear, sir.
Thank you. It's Andrew. Question for any of the panel. As we all know, there is no right of appeal against the judges' judgments in terms of red cards. But when we get to that last 100-meter rule, is that able to be appealed? especially as you can get video evidence as you would with the that Belarus athlete against the pole that was shown. Over.
The simple answer is yes, it can be appealed. That is why we allow them to cross the finish line and do not notify them of the disqualification until after they've finished.
Okay, just on that, I'm not sure if Andrew, if you're also saying if an athlete gets 3 or 4 red cards, there's no appeal.
No, that's right.
It's only the appeal is only
Last
in the
100 meters.
Yeah.
No, thanks very much.
Okay.
Yes, and Andrew, I think they can, but you'd have to have some you'd have to have some very good evidence that lodged around videos. I think everyone that has been disqualified has appealed, but I don't think anyone. There was one case, but that was some time ago, and that was because they had was it Osaka 2007, Steve, where Paco Fernandez got disqualified.
I mean,
they had some evidence. They had tracking cameras, didn't they? Had a camera next to him, etc.
Yeah, they had that. I mean, again, it's just an opinion because the chief judge at the time felt that he was obviously broke the rules. It's quite obvious. And I think what we're looking at is that you need to be sure that when you put a red card in, that the athlete is breaking the rules. And what I think a couple of our colleagues, we've all agreed to say, imagine that the red card that you're writing is going to disqualify the athlete. So whether it's the first, second, third or fourth that he gets, imagine that the card that you're writing disqualifies the athlete. So you need to be sure. If you're a chief judge in the last 100 meters, you're going to have to be doubly sure, because as the chief judge in Osaka found out, is all hell will break loose because they will appeal. And then there's cameras from every single angle, and then you're brought before the jury of appeal and then some, and you have to explain your decision-making process, and then the jury of appeal will say, well, we don't think it was clearly obvious to the man in the street that they were breaking the rules. And that was the case in Osaka. They didn't think that it was clearly obvious that he was breaking the rules.
So can I come in there, Steve, then? Because I thought race walking was judged to the naked eye and not on the video evidence, because video evidence often shows loss of contact. So if someone were to appeal and you therefore looked at the video evidence, then surely you're not looking at the same.
Yeah,
am I getting over what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, and going back to 2007, I mean, I was there, but I wasn't the chief judge by all means. But they did look at video evidence. But what they said was that it wasn't clearly obvious to the man in the street. So they were almost saying, we're looking at the video, but if you take it at normal speed, yes, normal speed, not slowing it down in any way, they didn't feel that there was a sufficient evidence that the athlete in question, Fernandez, was breaking the rules and warranted a disqualification.
I mean, the way I look at it is, when you're in the last 100 meters, you're looking for something much more than just simple loss of contact. Particularly, normally it's what it's going to be. You're looking for something that is horrendously bad.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of get in the rule book, it says clearly and obviously taken.
Yeah, so you're looking for more than just, as I say, simple potential loss of contact. You're looking at something that's really blatant, like we showed on the photographs of in youth championships.
Yeah, but I think that is important because everyone's got a camera. Everyone's got a camera.
Yeah, everybody's got a camera.
So you have to be 100% sure to when you make that decision.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Any last minute questions? No, I think everybody's like me. I've thoroughly enjoyed that session, gentlemen, and I'm sure on behalf of the people on the call tonight, thank you very, very much indeed for the presentation. It's been very insightful indeed. Just for everyone's kind of knowledge and information, like I said, right after this session, I will be sending out a copy of the recording and the PowerPoint presentation tonight. And the recording will also be put on the England Athletics website and the other home countries. And of course, I'll send a link out for that as well. There are further webinars planned for April. Communication will come out hopefully next week about that. But if you have any suggestions or topics that you would like to see included in the next round. Again, I'll provide my details and the other home country leads in details, and we can look into that for the next round. But on behalf of Steve, Noel, Ian and myself, thank you very much for attending tonight, and have a nice Friday and weekend as well. Okay, take care everyone.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everyone.